Chapter 1. The people of the sun. The rain fell heavily over the jungle, and the drums echoed between the tall trunks of the cibers. In the heart of Yucatan lay the city of Tayasal, one of the last remaining independent Maya cities. Fires danced in the darkness of the night, and the people gathered in the square around the Great Pyramid. Incense rose toward the sky, fragrant with copal, and the priests painted their bodies in black and red to remind them of the gods' death and life, night and day. The king, AJK adjective, IN can EK adjective, stood before his people. His feathered headdress shimmered in the torchlight. His gaze was dark but resolute. He knew what was coming. Rumors had reached him. Strangers from the east, clad in metal like the sun itself, riding beasts no Maya had ever seen. They were called Spaniards, the Spaniards. They had already crushed cities, chained other peoples, burned sacred books, and rewritten the world in the name of their own god. But here in Tayasal, the heart still beats strong and free. A city of resistance, Tayasal was built at the edge of a lake, its waters gleaming like obsidian under the moonlight. Canoes lay moored along the shores, ready to carry people and warriors across the waters. The houses were made of stone and lime, decorated with paintings that told of gods and heroes. On the walls of the tallest temples, hieroglyphs were carved, stories of stars, wars, and blood sacrifices. The Maya people had lived here for 1,000 years. They had survived drought, civil wars, diseases, and now they awaited yet another storm. Women prepared maize dough, sharpened obsidian knives, and men honed their spearheads. The children already knew something was coming. They played war in the alleys and shouted names like Can Ek adjective and Hunab Ku. The shadow of the enemy, the Spaniards, were first seen one early morning when the mist still rested over the lake. An old hunter, Itsam, rowed his canoe toward an island to fish. Suddenly he heard a sound, a thud, like that of great beasts trampling the ground. When the mist cleared, he saw something he had never seen before. Men clad in shining armor, carrying crosses in their hands and swords that glittered. Beside them stood creatures that looked like deer, but far larger and more terrifying. Itsam paddled home in panic. When he told what he had seen, unease spread through the city. Were these gods or men? Was their armor a sign of immortality? The priests cast lots with sacred seeds and said that the stars warned of a trial greater than any before. A council, AJK adjective, IN can EK adjective, summoned the council. They gathered in the innermost chamber of the palace, its walls adorned with paintings of ancient kings. The firelight flickered across their faces as they spoke. "The Spaniards want gold," said one of the elder warriors. "They have taken everything from the Aztecs in the west. They will not leave us in peace." "Perhaps they are gods," a priest objected. "Their skin is pale, their language strange, their power overwhelming." "Gods bleed too," Kanike adjective answered sternly. "And bleeding gods can die." The council agreed to prepare for war, but also to send scouts to study the enemy. They wanted to know how many they were, what they ate, how they slept. Knowledge was the weapon that could balance the sharpness of steel. A warrior's oath among those in the chamber was a young warrior named Balaam. He was tall, with tattoos along his arms that told of victories in past battles. His name meant jaguar, and he bore it with pride. When Can Ek adjective ended the meeting, Balaam stepped forward. "Let me go first," he said. "Let me see the enemy with my own eyes. I will learn how they move and what they fear." The king placed his hand on Balaam's shoulder. "You carry the people's hope, my son. May the gods protect you." Shadows in the camp. 2 nights later, Balaam and 3 other warriors crept through the jungle. They followed the smoke from the Spaniards' camp. Crawling closer, they saw something strange. The men lay in cloth hung between trees, and their beasts stood tethered. Their fire was strong, but their language incomprehensible. Balaam also saw how some of the Spaniards coughed and spat blood. Not even their shining armor could protect them from sickness. He saw their weapons, too, tubes that spat fire and smoke, arquebuses which split tree trunks apart. Balaam's heart pounded. This was not a war they had fought before, but he also saw something else. One of the Spaniards, a young man, wept silently. He held a necklace with the figure of a woman in his hand and whispered something. Then Balaam understood that the Spaniards, despite their steel and weapons, were men. They could feel fear. They could long for home. Preparing for war, when Balaam returned to Tayasal, he told everything he had seen. The council realized they could not meet the enemy in open battle. Their weapons were too strong. But the jungle was their ally. They could use the terrain, strike by surprise, attack when least expected. The priests raised their voices to the gods. Sacrifices were made, blood from captives and from warriors who willingly cut their tongues and ears to give strength to the people. Incense filled the temples, and the sky grew red with torches. The children were hidden deeper in the forest. The women prepared to bring food and water to the warriors. Everyone knew a storm was coming. But no one knew how long their strength would last against these strangers with fire in their hands. The first clash at dawn, the Spaniards broke camp and began marching toward the city. They sang their songs, lifted their crosses, and carried their banners with figures of Christ. But in the trees above them, the Maya warriors were waiting. Balaam and his men melted into the shadows, ready to strike. Suddenly, the jungle burst into sound: whistles, drums, cries. Spears rained down from the branches, obsidian blades flashed in the morning light. The Spaniards screamed in confusion. Some fell, others tried to fire their weapons, but missed in the chaos. Horses reared, terrified by the noise. It was the Maya people's first victory, small but significant. They now knew the enemy could be hurt, that even men in metal could fall. But they also knew this was only the beginning. The end of the beginning. When night fell over Tayasal, the warriors returned with blood on their hands and victory songs on their lips. The people rejoiced, but adjective raised his hand. "Do not forget," he said, "this was only a battle. The war has barely begun. The Spaniards will return, more and more of them. They do not only want our gold, they want our gods, our children, our very heart." And as the moon rose above the lake, reflected in the pyramid as if the gods themselves looked down, the Maya people knew their struggle was now destined. Their world was at stake. Chapter 2, The Cross of Fire. The sun rose slowly over the lake, its rays making the waters glow like molten gold. But in Tayasal, the morning was heavy. The people had celebrated victory the night before, yet unease burned in their hearts. They knew the Spaniards would not forget. They would return stronger, with vengeance in their eyes. Adjective stood atop the temple, gazing at the horizon. His hands were red with the blood of the sacrifice he had just performed, and his lips murmured prayers to Kukulkan, the serpent god who carried the world between heaven and earth. He felt the wind brush against his face, as though in answer from the spirits of the ancestors. Yet at the same moment, he also heard the sound of unease, women whispering, children asking why men in metal had come. The king understood. The people needed more than blood offerings. They needed hope. The Spaniards' host in the jungle, a few days' march away, the Spaniards had gathered again. Their leader, Captain Hernando de Avila, was a hard man with a beard and eyes dark as night. He had fought at Tenochtitlan, seen empires fall, and carried in his heart the conviction that God himself had given him the right to subdue this land. But even among his men, doubts lingered. They were weary, many ill, some wounded from the ambush. Their firearms were powerful, but slow to load. Their horses were restless, unaccustomed to the damp and noise of the jungle. Worst of all, they felt watched. Every night whistles echoed in the darkness. Every day they found tracks in the soil, bare feet, so well hidden they knew the Maya were always one step ahead. "These heathens are like shadows," muttered a soldier by the fire. "We are fighting the jungle itself." Captain Hernando lifted the cross he wore on his chest. "Then we will force the darkness to yield. Christ is with us. We will burn their idols, crush their temples, and their souls shall belong to God." His words gave strength to some, but others looked away in silence. Balaam in the dark. That same night, Balaam walked alone along the lake's shore. He felt the weight of his duty, but also pride. He had seen the enemy up close and lived, yet one question gnawed at him. How could they win against fire and steel? He sat by the water, dipped his hand in the lake, and watched the moonlight reflect. He thought of the young Spaniard he had seen weeping in the camp. Was he too an enemy, or just a man missing his home? Balaam wanted to hate them all, but something in his heart wavered. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind him. It was Ixchel, a young woman who served in the temple. She carried a water jar on her head and looked at him with eyes glimmering in the night. "You carry worry like a shadow, Balaam," she said softly, "but you are the jaguar you must not fear." "Even a jaguar can be brought down," he answered. Ixchel sat beside him. "The gods have chosen you. But perhaps strength lies not only in spears and knives, perhaps it lies in understanding the enemy." Balaam said nothing, but her words stayed with him. The scouts returned the next day. 2 scouts returned from the jungle. They had tracked the Spaniards for days and brought troubling news. More soldiers were on their way. Hernando had sent word to his allies, other peoples already subdued by the Spaniards. These men, dressed like Maya but led by Spaniards, carried hatred for Tayasal. When the council heard this, the chamber filled with unrest. "We are surrounded," said one elder. "If they join forces, we cannot withstand them." But Can Ek adjective rose, tall and proud. "We do not yield. Our ancestors built pyramids that still stand today. Our gods watch over us. The jungle is our friend, not theirs. We will not fall." The Spaniards marched when the rains eased. The Spaniards began their march toward Tayasal. They sang hymns and carried their banners high, Christ's cross gleaming above the jungle. Hernando rode at the front, his armor caked with mud, but his gaze unflinching. Along the way they met resistance. Pits lined with sharpened stakes lay hidden in the earth, logs toppled their horses, and arrows hissed from the trees. Yet for every man who fell, they pressed on. Hernando knew he had to break the Mayas' will quickly, otherwise his men would lose heart. One evening, as they made camp in a clearing, he summoned his officers. "Tomorrow we will set their sacred city aflame. We will burn their gods, their homes, their dreams. Then they will know nothing can stand against us." The night of fire, but the Maya did not wait. That night Balaam and his warriors crept toward the camp. They moved like shadows, their bodies smeared with clay to mask scent and light. When the moon stood high, Balaam gave the signal. Like a roar from the jungle itself, the attack erupted. Arrows flew, torches hurled into the camp, horses screamed in terror. Men stumbled from their tents, grasped swords, and shouted prayers to Christ as obsidian blades flashed in the dark. Hernando awoke to chaos. He drew his sword, cut down a warrior rushing at him, and roared, "Stand firm. God is with us." Balaam saw him, a giant in metal, and for the first time felt the heat of hatred in his chest. He lunged forward, their eyes locking in the torchlight. Hernando raised his sword, Balaam his spear, but in that instant a horse, wild with fear, charged between them. Both were thrown back, separated by the beast's power. The assault was brief but fierce. By dawn, the Spaniards' camp lay in ruins, several of their weapons destroyed, many men dead. But the Maya too had suffered. Young warriors lay lifeless in pools of blood, their bodies burned by fire. After the battle, Balaam returned to Tayasal with heavy steps. The people cheered the victory, but his heart was dark. He had seen the strength of Spanish steel, but also his own weakness. He had longed to kill Hernando and failed. Ixchel met him at the temple. She laid her hand on his cheek. "You live. That is a victory in itself. But for how much longer?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time, as if holding an answer he dared not hear. Hernando's oath in the jungle, among the smoking ruins, Hernando stood staring toward Tayasal. His eyes burned with fury, his voice hard as iron. "They think they can defy us. They think their gods can protect them. But I swear by Christ, I will crush their city. I will drag their king in chains and tear down their temples stone by stone. Let them call me demon, I shall be God's sword." His men heard him, and even those who had doubted felt his rage ignite them. They would march again, stronger, bloodier, until Tayasal lay in ashes. A people in the shadows in Tayasal, the council gathered once more. The priests spoke of greater sacrifices, the warriors demanded they strike before the enemy recovered. But Can Ek adjective raised his hand. "We fight not only for ourselves, but for all our ancestors and all our children. This is not a war of gold or blood, but of our soul. If we fall, our world falls." His words filled the people with both fear and pride. They knew the storm was only growing, but they were ready. And in the night, As the jungle sang with crickets and birds, everyone in Tayasal knew one thing. The war had only begun. Chapter 3, The Path of Blood. The sky was heavy with clouds the day the wind changed. The lake lay mirror still, but in Tayasal the stillness was an illusion. The drums had fallen silent, the songs had ceased. The people held their breath, as though the world itself was waiting for a verdict. Ajkin Kan-ek stood on the temple steps, gazing out over his people. Around him stood the priests, their hands red with blood, their eyes dark with sleeplessness. They had sacrificed, they had cried out to the gods, but the answers were unclear. The gods were silent, or perhaps their voice was hidden behind the thunder that rolled closer from the east. Balaam stood at the foot of the stairs, leaning on his spear. His body bore scars from battles, but it was his soul that suffered. He thought of Hernando, of their brief clash in the chaos of war, and of how close he had come to killing him. He knew their fates were now bound together. Hernando's return deep within the jungle, the Spaniards marched again. They were fewer than before, but their steps were harder, their will burning. Hernando led them, and at his side marched warriors from other peoples, men who hated Tayasal and now saw their chance for vengeance. They carried spears and bows, they spoke languages the Maya understood, and they knew the land. Hernando rode at the front, his armor scratched but still gleaming in the glow of torches. In his hand he carried not only the sword, but the cross. "This is God's will," he told his men. "We will cleanse this land of heathenry. We will build churches where their pyramids stand. We will leave behind a world our Lord will recognize." His words rang like iron. His soldiers answered with a cry that mingled faith and desperation. A city in preparation in Tayasal, the people braced for the storm. Women carried water and maize to the walls. Children helped fill baskets with stones to hurl. The warriors smeared their bodies with soot, painted their faces as death skulls, and sharpened obsidian blades until they glimmered black. The priests lit great fires atop the pyramids, smoke rising as signals to the heavens. They prayed to Kukulkan, to Chark the rain god, to Ixchel the moon goddess, to every power that might hear. Kan-ek spoke to his people. "This is our city, our blood, our son. No stranger shall take it from us. Let them come with fire and steel. We are Tayasal." A roar rose from the crowd, a sound so fierce it seemed the lake itself trembled. The first assault, when the Spaniards reached Tayasal, they saw the city's walls rising above the lake like a white crown. Hernando smiled coldly. "Burn it," he said, and hell began. Flaming arrows rained over houses, arquebuses thundered, shattering stone. Horses reared as drums pounded from the walls, and the Spaniards charged forward shouting. But the Maya stood ready. From the walls they hurled stones, poured boiling water, loosed arrows that fell in swarms. Balaam led a group through the water channels, striking from behind, their spears piercing Spaniards before they could turn. The battle was brutal and raw. Metal met stone, flesh met fire. Hernando himself stormed the gate, his sword cutting down warriors who dared approach. His men looked at him as a demon, relentless, merciless, but the gate held. Tayasal still stood. Fire in the night. At dusk, the Spaniards pulled back, but the night brought no peace. Hernando ordered his men to set the forest ablaze. The fire spread like a ravenous serpent, smoke rolling over the city. In Tayasal, people fought the flames, carrying water in baskets, beating them down with wet cloths. But the fire consumed their homes. Children cried, women screamed, and Balaam watched the street of his childhood turn to ash. He stood upon the walls and saw the fire dance in the night. His heart burned as fiercely. He swore, "I will stop him or die." Hernando's dream. That night Hernando slept uneasily. He dreamed he stood atop a pyramid, the earth below him blood-red. Voices rose in tongues he did not understand, cutting into his soul. Out of the smoke came a jaguar, its eyes glowing like fire. It stared at him, growled, and he felt a cold fear he had not known since childhood. When he woke, his brow was wet with sweat. He looked toward Tayasal, its walls still standing. He knew the fight was not over. The council in the temple in Tayasal, the council gathered once more. The priests demanded more sacrifices. Perhaps then the gods would grant victory. Women and children watched in terror, but Kan-ek shook his head. "We have given enough blood. Our strength lies in our unity, not in more screams. Balaam stepped forward. Let me lead a night raid. I have seen their weaknesses. They are tired, they fear the dark, they do not hear the jungle's language. We can strike before they gather strength. After a long silence, Kan-ek nodded. So it shall be. Fury of the night, that night hundreds of Maya warriors moved silently through the jungle. The moon was hidden behind clouds, the wind carried their steps. Balaam walked at the front, his eyes glowing in the dark. They struck like a storm, arrows and spears rained, fire burst in the enemy's tents. The Spaniards rushed about in confusion, horses screamed, and Hernando burst from his tent with sword raised. Balaam saw him again. Their eyes met, two worlds colliding. They hurled themselves at each other, sword against spear, sparks flying as metal met stone. Hernando was strong, but Balaam moved like a shadow, quick and silent. They fought until the ground around them was soaked in blood. Hernando shattered Balaam's spear, but the jaguar warrior drew his obsidian knife and swung it at the Spaniard's throat. A gun roared nearby, an arquebus fired in panic. Fire lit the night. Balaam was thrown back, scorched by the blast, but not dead. Smoke separated them, the battle dissolving into chaos. The stillness of morning when dawn came, the field was full of the dead. The Spaniards had lost many, but so had the Maya. Bodies lay side by side, men from different worlds, united in death's silence. Balaam limped back to Tayasal, his eyes dark with pain. He had survived, but Hernando still lived. The battle had decided nothing. Kan-ek stood on the walls, staring at the smoke rising from the Spanish camp. He knew this war would not be a matter of days. It would last for years, perhaps generations, but Tayasal still stood. And in the still morning, the drums sounded once again, faint but unyielding, a heartbeat that refused to fall silent. Chapter 4, when the sun fell, morning came with a blood-red sky, as if the sun itself warned of what was to come. The lake lay still, but Tayasal trembled. Everyone knew this would be the final trial. AJK adjective, IN Kan EK adjective stood atop the temple, dressed in his grandest feathered crown. His voice rang out across the city, "Today we are tested. If we fall, our gods, our children, our memories fall with us. But if we stand, our names shall live forever." The people answered with a roar, yet behind their courage lay heavy silence. Women clutched their children tightly, men looked coldly at their spears. All felt it. The end was near. Hernando's final plan in the jungle, Hernando gathered his men. He had lost many, but his will to conquer burned stronger than ever. He had called for more allies, and now he commanded a mixed host, Spaniards, conscripted warriors from other tribes, and some who sought vengeance against Tayasal. He rode before them, raising his cross high. "Today we crush the heart of the heathens. We tear down their city, we burn their gods, we make their children ours. This is God's will," the men answered with shouts. Drums thundered, horns blared, and the army's march shook the earth. The first assault, the Spaniards came like a wave. Cannons roared, arquebuses cracked, smoke lay heavy over the fields. Horses stormed the gates, swords flashing, but Tayasal answered. From the walls rained arrows, stones, and boiling water. Women hurled burning torches, children carried arrows to the warriors. Priests sang loudly, their voices mingling with the pounding drums. Balaam stood at the gate, leading the men in battle. His obsidian knife gleamed black, his eyes burned with fire. He fought like a jaguar, cutting down enemies one by one, but he knew the tide only grew stronger. The breach, after hours of fighting, the walls began to crumble. The Spaniards battered the gates with logs, their cannons tore gaping holes in the stone. Smoke was so thick the sun was hidden, the city lay in shadow. Balaam cried out to his men, "Do not let them pass." For Tayasal, they surged forward, meeting swords with spears, steel with stone. Blood flowed like water through the streets, but the Spaniards pressed on, step by step, with shields locked and swords flashing. Hernando and Balaam in the chaos, they found each other once more. Hernando, clad in steel, the cross at his chest. Balaam, covered in blood and soot, his eyes blazing. They hurled themselves at one another. Sword against knife, steel against obsidian, the clash echoed like two worlds colliding. "Your city will fall," Hernando shouted. "Your time is over." "We are the sun," Balaam answered. And the sun does not die. They fought, surrounded by screams and fire. Hernando's sword struck, Balaam's blade flashed. At last Balaam fell to his knees, drenched in sweat and blood. Hernando raised his sword for the killing blow. But before the blade fell, Ixchel threw herself forward. She screamed, her body becoming a shield. The sword struck her chest. She collapsed into Balaam's arms, her blood staining the earth red. Balaam roared like a jaguar in agony. He hurled himself at Hernando, but the sword met him again. One blow, hard as steel against stone, and Balaam fell beside her. The fall of the city when the gates finally shattered, the Spaniards poured in. They set houses ablaze, dragged women and children in chains, smashed sacred statues. Priests were cut down on the temple steps, their blood flowing along the stones. A JK adjective, IN can EK adjective stood atop the temple, watching his city burn. He raised his arms to the sky. If we fall, let us fall like the sun, in fire. He cast himself into the flames below. His body vanished in the blaze, and the people saw their king die like a flame. Hernando's victory when night fell, Tayasal lay in ruins. The flames had devoured the temples, smoke hung heavy over the lake. Hernando stood upon the highest pyramid, the cross in his hand, the sword at his side. "Behold," he cried, "the heathen city is fallen, God is with us." His men cheered, but the cheer was hoarse, weary. They knew what the victory had cost. The ground was covered with the dead Spaniards and mire alike. The air reeked of blood and ash. The memory that burned, yet even in defeat, there remained something unbroken. In the darkness, beyond the ruins, survivors hid. Women and children fled into the jungle. Old men carried memories and songs. And among them Balaam's name was whispered. He had fallen, but like a jaguar, with fire in his heart. His cry would live on, his spirit wandering the jungle, for even though Tayasal had fallen, the sun could never be fully extinguished. Epilogue. Years later, the Spaniards raised a church upon the ruins of Tayasal. In their books, they wrote that the heathens had been defeated, that the light of God had triumphed. But among the people of the jungle, in villages far from the Spaniards' gaze, another story lived on. They spoke of can EK adjective, who burned like the sun, of Ixchel, who sacrificed herself for love, of Balaam, the jaguar, who fought against steel with heart and courage. And when the drums beat in the night, the people knew that even though their city was gone, their spirit endured. For the sun always sets, but it also rises again.